Hi, I'm Satyajit Hange, the co-founding farmer of Two Brothers Organic Farms. And you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
My name is Abhay Dandekar, and I share conversations with talented and interesting individuals linked to the global Indian and South Asian community. It's informal and informative, adding insights to our evolving cultural expressions, where each person can proudly say, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. I'm really just thrilled and delighted to share a conversation with Satyajit Hange from Two Brothers Organic Farms. Satyajit, thank you so much for joining me on what I hope is not too hot of a summer day for you near Pune.
Abhay, a pleasure to be connecting you to you. It's a lovely, sunny, bright morning. We just had some showers 2 days back in Pune. I don't know, being an April month, but it's a pleasant day. And I thought that, trust me, I know what I'm doing, but glad to meet you and figure out that even, uh, you know, you're pretty confident of what you're doing. So happy to be conversing with you.
I'm at least trying to be. Trying is probably the most important part. So much of what I've been learning about your journey and certainly about Two Brothers is it's an innovation yet based on a very retro concept. And I'm curious because a lot of what we do is driven by so many different types of motivations. But in your particular work, how much of your journey has been driven in a way by nostalgia?
So, both me and Ajinkya are farmers' sons, and we are the co-founding farmers of this farm. We hail from a small village called Bhodani, which is in the rural parts of Pune. And while growing up, we were put in a boarding school, but while growing up, our holidays were spent in the village. So we were kind of exposed to, livestock in front of our home, the food growing process, village life. And the house we stayed in is called a wada. A vada is typically an architectural structure built, in between the last 500 years. My vada is 100 years old, and my great grandfather built it. It's made out of stone, mud, and wood. And we lived in it, we grew in it. And when we were doing a job in the city, fast forward after our MBAs, this always came back to our minds as a life that's peaceful, a life that's meaningful. And in my home, it's a joint family. So I had my grandmother, my grandfather, my mother, my uncle living with us. And they used to keep telling us about how the farming landscape has evolved and how livestock have evolved and how machinery on the farm has evolved. And, I always felt this personally that the kind of farming done, by them was very holistic, was very, sustainable, of course, but it had a beauty or, an element of beauty to it. And, while doing a job, we missed that tremendously. And when we came back, the idea was, how do I do it in that fashion? How do I get the tradition back inside, which I felt was pretty, pretty scientific,
Mm.
and yet balance this aspect of, you know, making it a good business and, balancing tradition. So a lot of it is inspired by tradition and by what people did long back.
Yeah, and you have this very idyllic impression of what life was like back then. You mentioned this word holistic. Have you found that to be something that you have to convince yourself of, or does it come naturally? Because, we have this impression based upon storytelling of what Avada was like back in, maybe two, three, four generations ago. We have this idea that it was holistic and it was kind of ideal of what farming was like, and yet many of the challenges of that age are relatively foreign to us now, with both, and we have some of the advantages of modern technology. So, has some of this lifestyle taken either some practice, or has it come a little bit more natural for you, as especially as you've gotten better at it?
I, reflecting back on that, I can observe that it has come a lot more naturally because, like I said, in a year for 3 months, we spent our time on the village, in the Vada, and everybody around us lived that lifestyle. So they did not
Mm.
know what a lifestyle in the city looked like. They lived it as if it's a usual normal day. And we observed that while we had experience of living both these lifestyles, in the city, the one that we were living, and when we came back for those 3 months, in the village, the one that the villagers were living. And we could compare both. So, in the village, we naturally lived it. I remember when I used to go out there, I never wore jeans in a village. It was very uncomfortable, very difficult to roam around in the farm, in the sun. So we used to stitch these white cotton pajamas. There was a village tailor. You get, white cloth is readily available and cotton, and he stitched pajamas that cost us 300 rupees. And we wore it on a t-shirt and we used to go in the farm. So even now, when we came back to farming, and then one of the aspects was that we could wear what we loved wearing, what was comfortable, instead of wearing something that really didn't keep us comfortable. So I think it came to us naturally, and that's the reason also why we took to this kind of life and this kind of farming. Ultimately, a lot of those things were very natural. The house was as it is. You know,
Mm.
we should sleep down on mattresses. Get up and in the summers go for swimming in a well. I just went swimming 2 days back with my kids now. I take them on the weekends to the farm, and it just felt very natural.
I'm curious because this now you've been doing this for over, 10, 11 years, and it's obviously successfully grown into something that is much less of just a small endeavor, but, a movement, if you will. So in that way, and you mentioned kind of what it was like when you were imagining this in your corporate life, and then also what it was like as a child, and now what it's like actually as a co-founder of an organic set of organic farms. What does a typical farming day look like now, especially with the both the technology of today and also in a way the trappings of being a business owner and a leader? But so what does an average typical day look like, and how do you maybe compare that to the life of your azoba or your barnzoba?
Well, that's a very interesting topic. I'll start with how they live their life and what my grandmother told me. So
Yeah.
my Panzoba, my great grandfather, was the guy who actually was very successful at farming, and he had set up jaggery units and was a very successful farm entrepreneur, agri
Mm.
entrepreneur. And he was uneducated. He was illiterate, not uneducated, but illiterate. He didn't study formal schooling.
Yeah.
It all came through experience. And he used to get up at 3:30 a.m. in the morning and have a bath, do his exercise. So we had a room in the Wada which was full of red mud. That time we
Mm.
didn't have mats, and this was red mud to exercise on. And they had the old instruments, the gada and a rope for
Yeah.
climbing
Yeah.
and everything. And they used to do their sit-ups and push-ups and do their workouts for an hour. And they used to go swimming to the well. We had a nearby well near our house, and they used to jump in the well, cold water, have a bath, come out, drink milk that was freshly taken out from a cow. And after drinking milk, they used to go on the farm. So I believe they used to hit the farm by 6:30 a.m. And from there, they used to work till noon. In the noon, my grandmother used to get food for my grandfather in the farm that consisted of bhakri and some onion and some dry vegetable, gravy stuff. He used to eat his food and then work for another 2, 3 hours. And by 4 o'clock, they used to come back to the village, to the house. And I think after that, some cow work and milking work used to be done, and eat dinner by I think 6:37 and retire to bed early. So this was the lifestyle that he lived. Uh, when I tried being a farmer and living that lifestyle, I've realized that the availability of electricity and internet gives you a lot of disturbances in the end, but it just makes you watch television or watch some screen time on the mobile. So
Yeah.
my day, I retire late by say 10ish. I try getting up early, but it takes me 6 a.m. to get up when I'm in the village. And if I'm there, then I go to the cow shed to work on the cow shed because there's no gym out there, but it's random working out there, removing cow dung from the cow shed,
Yeah.
composting it in the composting yard. And it takes 2 hours for doing all of that, but it's a lovely workout. It's a lovely morning to be with the cows in the morning, the sun on
Mm.
your head, and just working with mud and manure. And then by 8 a.m., come home, have a bath. And now, since we run a business that is associated to agriculture, Then the regular meetings of sorts start up at
Sure.
10ish, 10:30, and then till lunch we do our meetings and then have lunch and again do our meetings till 4, 5 o'clock. And then 5 o'clock again go back in the farm. Now we have a small artisanal jaggery making
Mm.
unit, sit out there for some time, go in the farm, do some menial work, and come back by evening. Then again check mails and have dinner, and then the night usually extends till 10 p.m. because of
Yeah.
a lot of distractions nowadays. But yeah, that's how my life is now.
I was going to say, so, definitely these are the normal workings of a modern farmer, but definitely, quite a little bit of a contrast, at least from your Azoba, your Barnzoba.
Yeah,
I'm curious, does this, if you think about the differences between that lifestyle and the lifestyle that you have now, not only as a farmer, but as a business leader, you must have to grapple with so many different tensions and forces that are out there that in a way are just competing with each other. So, the natural tensions between sustainable local farming and the engine of a developing economy, the tension between local community based food and scaling a business that has a global distribution, the tension between cooperative distribution of wealth, amongst a group of farmers versus corporate farming and a very hierarchical structure of capital that comes in from private equity and investors and those kinds of things. So those are the kinds of tensions that perhaps, your family members from many generations ago didn't have to deal with. But
yeah.
in this way, these are real questions that you have to in fact navigate. So I'm just curious how those grapplings are important to think about when part of the motivation to come back was to in fact have a much more simplified life, or have a life that was really based on this holistic principle of organic farming.
No, it's I would say a very complicated and tough territory now, given the complexity of running the business and helping other farmers and doing all the things that a regular brand has to do, and
Right.
the interest of continuing farming holistically. But I feel both in a way are connected and make each other sustainable. Especially the front end of interacting and running a business makes this kind of farming sustainably, and that came through experience because when we grew food the right way, the yield dropped. And when we took it to the market, we were not rewarded with the right price of good food. And that value meant that this kind of farming was not sustainable. And we were not dependent on any grants or anything. We wanted to make the farming in itself sustainable and for people to pay the right price, to value the produce in the right way. And that led us to creating a brand and the packaging and an online shop and giving a lot of content around and spreading awareness around why the food was priced the way it was and what are the nutritional differences and other aspects around good food. And then hiring people who can help us do this. People like me who are yet stuck in the corporate world but have very less sense of purpose in what they're doing. They might not have a farm, but they would like to get associated with a movement, with a brand that has a strong sense of purpose. And though they have graduated from premier institutions, so many of the people who have joined us are, you know, postgraduates from premier institutions, but have chosen to work with us because they feel there's a strong sense of purpose in what we are doing. So that is one aspect. Even in the capital world, I've always believed that there are conscious capitalists out there.
Mm.
All capital is not same. There are
Yep.
many people who would like to employ capital back to make this world a better place, to make it more sustainable, to support environment and social impact work. And likely we have found investors who have invested in us, the latest being Nitin Kamath, who runs a foundation, a fund called Rain Matter, and his focus is investing in ESG.
Yeah.
And he's given us, our first round of large funds, our Series A. And he's a, kind of a conscious capitalist. So I believe that while capital is essential, while talent is essential, while systems and technology is essential, not all capital is bad, not all talent is bad, not all systems and tech is bad. And we are breaking new grounds of having to balance, stuff. But someone has to start somewhere. If I didn't take these two steps, an entrepreneur behind me, who starts by taking some inspiration from us, can build the next two steps. And
Mm.
then, that's how we can create organizations that care for environment, yet make money, yet can pay people, and can create a platform where people with a strong sense of purpose can come and work and create the careers out of it. So I just
Yeah,
feel that every day I should be doing something that's lesser evil than what the existing system is. It might not be a perfect situation right now, but it's lesser evil than what it was yesterday.
sure. And you mentioned the word purpose. Is that a purpose that obviously you have found that, but when you interact and develop relationships and partnerships with others who have that sort of conscious investing or conscious growth, or they're keeping that consciousness in mind at each step of the way, is that purpose? Does it seemingly feel infectious? That of say that, yeah, wow, we want to be a part of that, that have that same feeling of purpose, and does that make your sense of purpose that much stronger?
I have seen it, and just 2 days back, I was in Bombay, Mumbai. A very large fund, had called us for a meeting out there, and we had 1 hour designated for the meeting, but that meeting extended for 2 hours.
Mm,
And the founder of the fund actually came down with all the respect that he had for us and the work we were doing, to leave us down. We are a very small company for the investments that they have done and for the portfolio that they have. But he spent 2 hours, and he ended up, with a note that today my children are in school, and I'm really concerned about what they are consuming and what they
mm,
will consume in the future. And if there are no entrepreneurs like you who are investing in creating a better food chain, and also about, he spoke about the growing trend of AI and how it can make many people jobless. And he's like, you'll work with farmers, you're allowing farmers to remain in the rural landscape by giving them a premium for the food they are growing, by making farming sustainable. He's saying there'll be a huge problem of unemployment if the way technology is shaping up, and especially in India, given the population that we have. So he was like, people and platforms like you all need to be supported. And I felt that respect coming immediately. I felt the nature of discussion being different. It's very personalized when you talk about impact, because then it's just talking about that person's future and his next generation's
mm,
future. So I've
yeah,
seen that have a rub-on effect to anybody I have interacted with. Everybody I feel has that core where they want to do good, but the concerns and prioritizing of commercial aspects take over, and they end up going that way. But when an opportunity like this comes, where there is good commercial sense and a strong sense of purpose, I believe that that can supersede only commercial interactions.
yeah, and that builds a very sort of compelling story that's hard to stay away from. And yet, the path of least resistance is not necessarily to go down that direction, right? So do you find that those forces sometimes obviously are very, very difficult to combat?
They are difficult, but when we go with the mindset that we have burnt our boats and there is no other way out but this,
Mm,
I have seen circumstances shape up, and people
yeah.
come in from nowhere and have come to support, and in terms of talent, in terms of capital, in terms of support from customers, I've seen those things coming and shaping us. Somebody needs to take that decision and be adamant about staying on that path and doing it irrespective of what challenges come across, and then people bet on him, and then people who want to support in some form support him. So like, I've always believed that the little money that I earn while doing a job, though if I believed in values of ethics and principles and stuff, I ended up investing my money in the stock market in companies that gave a higher return, but did not really watch out whether that company is having a negative impact on the environment, on
Mm,
social life, and in general on health and stuff. We normally believe in our personal life and eat good, but when it comes to investments, we prefer companies that do good in terms of commerce and not so much an impact. And that led me to realize that this is not only a company we are putting up for producing good food and handholding farmers to do farming sustainably, that but tomorrow, if we really perform well financially and go on to list ourselves on the stock exchange, we can tell investors who are conscious about their capital and how
mm,
their capital has an impact, by giving
yeah.
them an opportunity to invest in companies like ours. So retail investors, especially, I believe that that while the difficulty is there, but if you're kind of adamant and you've closed your options, then it's not difficult, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Having sort of, like you said, there's a discipline consciousness to this, and really, hopefully, that catches on, especially for not just entrepreneurs, but everybody in the ecosystem. Um, that's obviously an admirable set of goals, and yet everywhere in India, and I mean, particularly in Maharashtra, there's a really set of challenges that are faced of crowding and economic growth and urbanization and just the colossal air pollution issue, all of which kind of intersect, especially in your arena. So, when you are dealing with all of those things that are seemingly incompatible with organic farming in a free market, how do you then combat those forces and build and scale a brand and a movement while eventually not actually contributing to those exact same forces that drive against you in the first place? Does that make sense, by the way?
Yeah, yeah. I think the earlier question was similar, but more on a social and a business aspect. This is more, I think, on the supply side, you know, working with
Exactly.
farmers and not
Yep.
getting swayed away by, you know, what is happening all around us.
Yeah.
So it is difficult. Similar in the rural landscape, 99% of farmers now do conventional farming. Conventional farming is farming using chemical inputs and pesticides and insecticides and everything. But what is helping today is the fact that this kind of chemical based farming has completed 60 years. One generation of farmers has done this. And now his next generation is seeing the adverse effects of doing this kind of farming. His next generation is seeing the fact that this kind of farming has ruined soil fertility, it's ruined water holding capacity, it's ruined biodiversity both above and below the soil. And there is concern around, what will the next generation inherit? And while they have this question mark on their mind, when an platform like ours gets exposed to them and examples like our kind of farming get exposed to them, they see a ray of hope. And I'm not saying all of them, but out of 100, one farmer comes out and, gets connected with us and starts doing sustainable farming. And we support him by paying a premium for what he's producing and creating that, cycle of sustainability. And then when we are able to handhold, I think, thousands of such farmers, they become examples in their regions for so many other farmers to come and implement this kind of farming. Because I've seen that, the feeling of consciousness towards soil, environment doesn't only come with money. And it's not only there with people in the city who are well read, but I've seen that even people in the village, and I believe that they're highly spiritual because day to day they're interacting with nature and, they're exposed to all these learnings and they have a great concern about future and about how and where humanity is going, where environment is going. And though if it doesn't pay them, I've found so many farmers, very small landholding farmers, shifting to sustainable ways of farming only
Mm.
because it's a non-violent base, way of farming. And they believe in that kind of non-violence. And there's a spiritual aspect to the farming they do. So for me to connect with these kind of farmers and give them a platform to ensure they get economically rewarded for that, is much easier. And I've seen that tribe growing.
Yeah. Well, it also seems like you can provide a pretty easy, well, not easy, but definitely a viable glide path that gets away from some of those forces and try and definitely convince both small farmers and again all the others in that, particularly in that economic ecosystem. You are someone who had a life as in the corporate world, and I'm thinking when you have now made that pivot to being an organic farmer, what skills did you have to translate from the corporate world into a rural Maharashtrian farm to make Two Brothers successful?
So while we were working in large banks when we were in Pune, there is your colleagues, the people you work with, understand your communication and you understand their communication and the means of communication can be emails and other stuff. But when we went back to the village, our first colleagues were workers on the farm
Mm,
and to
yeah.
relate to them and to make them believe in what we were saying, and to make them just do the work that we were telling them to do, and for us to relate to their issues and to kind of emote with them was very difficult because
Mm.
there the problems were not that his career growth is getting stuck somewhere or he has some professional goals as such, but the problems were like, he didn't have money to come to work. The lady's husband has beaten her because of an alcohol issue, and there are other societal limitations that they have when they come to work, and it's not only money or some other issue. And then there's a housing problem, and there's another health issue. So we had to solve for those small issues so that they could then trust us and they would do what we were telling them.
Mm.
And, you know, to show them a picture that was very large was unbelievable. They couldn't believe in
Yeah.
something. Like if I told them we are going to improve the world, I mean, they were like, I don't relate to it. If I told
Right.
them we want to improve how people eat food, they were like, I don't relate to it. So when I told them that, while working on the farm, when we are not using chemicals, it impacts our health positively, they could relate to it.
Mm.
So I had to show them a picture in which they related to, and then bind them in and then work with them. So these were very seemingly small issues, but I couldn't convince a graduate from the city to join us then because we had no money coming out of the business. There was no glamour, there was no brand, there was uh, a lot of uncertainty. I had to work with these colleagues of mine for the first 4 5 years till a certain scale was reached. And these colleagues were, third standard and fourth standard dropouts, and who did manual labor most of the time. Their sense of motivation came from something else. So those were the issues we faced. I would say more than anything else.
And especially in those early days when you were building the brand, building the business, growing in a way your trust capital with the people who you're working with, what did you have to unlearn about yourself?
So, when we have done an MBA, we are taught how to talk and how to present ourselves. And there is a sense of self worth that we have, which we establish ourselves with. And I was working at Citibank, and it's one of the world's greatest banks and stuff. When I came out here, that meant nothing to the guy who was my colleague on the farm. And then that ego which I had created for myself started troubling me because, you get a lot of sense of who you are when with the brand you work with and with the people you work alongside. And, when you have colleagues who are from Harvard and Stanford, you feel good, but in the village context, that was very difficult. And that ego that we had created about ourselves was troubling us.
Mm.
And we found that pretty disturbing. We found it pretty challenging, but we fought through it and saw through another day.
Do you have to, now that you've been met with some success, and there's new pastures of opportunity that you seek out, do you have to remind yourself of how important it is to have had let that some of that ego go and let go of that? Is that take a lot of practice that you have to continue to remind yourself of that?
Since we have experienced it, now it doesn't take a lot of practice. Initially, it did,
Hmm.
but I believe it's a humbling thing that happened to us, and that's helped us and will help us a long way going forward. Because when we remove all the layers and when you try to connect to a person on very basic things, you get to learn from them. I've learned a lot from my colleagues on the farm. How happy
Hmm.
they are. They have very little means to live their lives. They might not have permanent accommodation. You know, they don't have insurance. If tomorrow they fall sick or ill, they are heavily undercovered. They're subject to very poor medical care. Um, they have no deposits in the bank, but they live a very happy life. They have hunger. When they put their head on the pillow, they can sleep off in within 10 seconds. You can just see that they live in the present. And that's something I learned because in the process of education and university and stuff, we learn to think about the future a lot and prepare for it, and sometimes in that stress ourselves out and live with a lot of fear, and half our life goes in preparing for that fear. That incident might never happen in life, but we forget to enjoy the present moment. And I've seen that people who are illiterate, who have not gone through a formal education process, who cannot think about what retirement is and stuff, at least they enjoy the present, and we learn that from them.
Mm.
So I believe that those instances have humbled us, have taught us to take what it is from people out there, and in the city to take what is beneficial from people who are highly educated and who live professionally in the city also.
Yeah, there's this sort of collaborative empowerment, right? That you get from building those relationships, especially with, those stakeholders and colleagues now who have had a much different background,
Yeah, absolutely. I've always
right?
felt that there are two essentials that a person needs. One is peace, and the second is prosperity. And in the villages, there's a lot of peace, and in the cities, there's a lot of prosperity.
Hmm.
And if you can marry both, you can have a much more fulfilling life.
Yeah, so true. So true. I have a sort of relative question on the social impact part, because traditionally, of course, there's a lot of gender inequity in some of the rural areas. And have you particularly seen that empowerment function and the way that you build relationships just as important for women who are in the rural areas as it is for men?
Yeah. So a large part of the people who work with us now in the village are women, and giving them employment near to their homes where they have a lot of responsibilities back home, so where they can just run back and do something that requires their attention, come back to work, giving them that flexibility, giving them wages that are more or less equal to men in the villages. And along with that, having a formal HR come and talk to them, giving them some financial education,
Mm,
providing them with insurance. We also support their children for any educational sponsorship, scholarships and stuff. So all that has led to, empowerment of women in the village. I've seen that women usually are better with handling money, and that has I've seen the difference in that for sure.
I wanted to ask you about this piece because when we talk about equity and growth, it also is true not just at the personal scale in a family, in a community, in a village, but perhaps at the macro scale in a business ecosystem. I'm curious about this particular thought. Is it important to have thriving competition in this kind of organic family farming and organic food ecosystem, so that consumers and stakeholders can have a lot of affordability, a lot of free movement within those systems, and then a lot of innovation can be advanced? Or is it better to have more mature growth and a bigger market share by just a few key players, so that you drive a much more homogenous marketplace and therefore capture a little bit more longevity for your own business? I know that's a kind of loaded question, but I'm just curious how you think about that, again, with this idea of consciousness.
So I feel that diversity should be there. There should be many diverse players who represent their region, their farmers, their produce, and their products. And India is so diversified that every 40 kilometers you go, the language changes, the soil changes, the eating habits change, and if you have only four or five major players, they might not do justice to the diversity that we come from. So I believe that there should be more than 1,000 players, small brands that are doing work in local pockets that are representing that, so that the diversity, so that uniqueness in every region can be maintained. More or less like European cheese and wine brands compared to American cheese and wine brands. There are, I believe, in America there are one or two or three or four very large players. In the Europe you go, there are very small wine cheese brands in villages and in countryside, and they all survive. And people value everybody's different uniqueness, and everybody's in business. And I believe that instead of concentrating that power and wealth in four five hands, if it is spread across a 50, 60, or a 400, 500 hands, you have a much more uh, you know, you have a much more, I would say, a more tolerable system to handle any black swan events or any other disturbances that happen.
Yeah, that's lovely. It's actually really very eloquently said. And from, of course, the consumer's perspective, I love the idea of so many different varieties of bhakri and pitla and kanda
Yeah.
that you get, not just in one place, but you go travel 5-10 kilometers and it would be, just a different slight nuance to that. Not to mention all the different kinds of other just delicious things that you can get, that you get so many varieties of flavor with. Then, when people come and visit you now on the farm and they see your ongoing work, what do you think they're most surprised by?
One is, people who come from the city and come and visit us. The first question is, how did you leave a job in the city and come back to a village?
Right.
I felt that that single thing is so disturbing for people to even think about. And
Right.
I have personally felt that it's so relieving when you take that decision and you go
Mm.
beyond that fear of the predictable to a life that is not predictable, but you're unshackling yourselves, and you
Yeah.
are you are kind of in power and in control and not driven by circumstances. But
Sure.
people find it very disturbing. They're so tied to the comforts that a city life provides. So that is one thing.
Yeah.
Second is, they're also startled at how we are doing everything very artisanally. And while, people have learned and seen and taught that food has to be produced by large machinery and, monocropping, and there's no scope for any other, diversity. I believe that they get startled when they see us producing stuff artisanally, employing more people, and working with them.
Mm.
So these couple of things are something that they get startled by, but they do enjoy thoroughly the time on the farm, and they do enjoy the food that is made on the farm with farm fresh ingredients in the traditional way, like puran poli and stuff. When we serve them, they absolutely go crazy because it tastes
Right.
different, and it's an amazing experience for them.
Yeah, I'm sure the sensory part of that surprise is
Yeah.
always much easier to deal with. But I wonder if people are in a way kind of insecure about like how liberating it can be for someone to do that. And then of course,
Yeah.
in a way also they must be frightened by the fact that like, wow, this is quite possible to do in an artistic and artisanal way. And I remember I talked to a fashion entrepreneur named Rahul Mishra, and he was sharing some amazing things about how slow fashion is, in fact, so much more rewarding for people, but they're just not used to it. So once you show people that you can do this in a relationship based way, in an artisanal way, then you kind of change the framework a little bit. I'm sure too.
No, absolutely. I like the word you use, liberating. I think people, while they would want to be liberated from the circumstances they are in, they fear liberation because
Right.
they do not know how it feels. They do not know, it's unpredictable. I think while they romanticize it, they are not willing to accept it.
And for you and Ajinkya, was there a sort of an aha moment that you had like that? Was there a day that you just there was a switch that went off and you said, "Listen, this is I have to make that leap into that sort of liberation, if you will."
I was doing a job which was very comfortable. I was working in my last stint in the university. It was a friend who ran it, a large university, and there was nobody troubling me for targets, no,
Right.
reporting of sorts, and very, very comfortable. And I was enjoying it. And in the night, one day, something troubled me, and I called up Ajinkya, and we went down and we went to have a coffee at Pune railway station because that was the only place that was open in the midnight. And I remember everything, both of us just getting out everything that was pent up in us and throwing it up and discussing. And I told him that, I am on a way that is made of gold. It's so amazing. Life feels unreal after having worked with the city banks and everything. This is absolutely, I'm getting the money I want, the designation I want, the work I want. It's very rewarding. But that road is of gold. It is taking me to a destination where I do not want to reach. Tomorrow I
Yeah.
might become the vice chancellor. I never want to see myself as a vice chancellor.
Mm.
I don't want that kind of responsibility. It's not me. Whereas what's nudging me is farming. And that
Yeah.
road is dirty and it's full of stones and it's uneven. But where it takes me ultimately at the end of my life, my career, if I call myself a farmer, I'll be super proud. If I'm in the farm, at the end of my life, I'll be super proud. In the mud, with soil, in water, and with sun on my head. So I feel that we have one life to live. And if we don't experiment and just live life because it is comfortable now,
Mm.
soon we will be in a trap. It's like the frog which gets used to boiling water, till a
Yeah.
stage where it loses energy and it cannot leap out. And that was one of the conversations that was, that aha kind of a moment. It just came in the night, in midnight.
Yeah.
It just came and we discussed it, and both of us said it made sense. And post that, we started taking our steps towards doing farming then.
It's a great reminder that most great ideas probably start at Pune railway station. Um, one thing that is fascinating to me that you're a great student of Vedantic literature, and I'm curious, how have you been able to connect the dots between that very rich cultural heritage and the work that you have as an entrepreneur?
So that philosophy is the basis of a lot that we do now. The interest in philosophy came, I think, 15, 20 years back when me and Ajinkya were facing these very existential questions in life. We came from a farming background. Our father was doing farming. And it was a difficult job. And in college, we didn't have a bike to go on, and our friends had bikes, and we didn't have so many sets of clothes. Our friends had all those liberties. Our pocket money was less. They had a lot of money. And these questions started coming up as to why me? Why couldn't I live a life like them? And why is my father struggling his way through farming? And I knew that he was in debt and it was a difficult time and we might have to sell our land. And all those questions, when we went back to the village, used to face us. And there was a stark difference in the life in the village and our college life. And these questions kept troubling us, and we went about finding answers. And that's how we took to some books in philosophy, and that's how Vedanta came about being. And we started getting many answers from there, and it started making sense because, um, you know, we had many questions, and those questions might seem funny now, but those questions quite troubled us, and science didn't have any answer to them. And this philosophy made a lot of sense when we studied it, and we took to it. We read it, and I, in fact, before doing my entrepreneurial stint, went and stayed at an ashram for 8 months and read philosophy extensively. And uh, amongst other things, I realized that the first thing I have to do is do a profession of my liking, and it's called swadharma, and not do anything that is not of my liking, which is called paradharma, and it simply means that you do something that you are 100% passionate about because it gives you a tailwind of sorts, and if you do
Mm.
something you're not passionate about, it gives you headwind, and for your spiritual growth. Uh, when you do something you're passionate about, it's easier for you to realize your spiritual goals and in general to grow as a human being, to be much more happier. And that made sense, and that's where a decision of farming came about because we felt that was our swadharma, and we jumped into it. And those challenges that we had in farming, when we met people who were illiterate, but I call them highly educated, because for me the word education doesn't mean anything to do with degrees. It means how much you can draw within yourself, and that's actually the etymological meaning of the word educate. It's to draw out and not to put
Yeah.
in. And I felt that villagers and people who lived a simple life and farmers had so much of wisdom. They did not have knowledge, but they had wisdom. And that's where we could gain from them. And philosophy helped us to look at them and to kind of keep our ego aside or reduce it to a large extent and to relate to a larger aspect of being and not to only my personal self. It was about my village and then about soil in general and then about environment, and the more larger circle I related to and became one with, the lesser pain, the lesser trouble I had. Because when you think about ourselves very selfishly, it is very unsettling. It is very troubling. But when you
Yeah.
relate to a larger cause, it is like you said, liberating. So philosophy has helped us at every stage. Even today, when we raise capital, when we get relative success, we have we are trying our best to not get swayed away by any success or to get swayed away by any failure, and just to remain equanimous in what we do. I know it's difficult, it's easy to say all these things, but philosophy is something that reminds us constantly about all these aspects, and it has helped us sustain what we do in the way we do till date. And it has helped us merge that peace and prosperity together to live a much more satisfying life.
Yeah. Yeah. So many different tentacles back to mission, vision, values, and understanding kind of your purpose, and in a way not getting seduced by the many highs and lows of that. We started out by talking about nostalgia, and we definitely talked a lot about your family background, and of course this now philosophical background that keeps everything very well grounded. I'm always curious and interested in cross generational conversations. And so, one final thought that I wanted to quickly chat about, but I'm curious of one thing. If you could somehow today have a conversation with your Parnzoba and perhaps even your Kapar Parnzoba, about farming and the life that they led and the life even that you're leading right now, what few questions would you actually ask them?
I mean, I feel that, they lived because of some circumstances. They didn't have a choice. They had to do those things. And there is so much to observe from them. There is very less I can ask them because I believe unknowingly they lived a life that was sustainable, a life that was personally rewarding, spiritually evolving, physically, the work kept them fit. I would just give them an advice that, just in case modernization ever comes and hits the village or the farm, don't take to it. Stay the way you are. That's a trap, you know,
Yeah.
and keep doing what you're doing. People pay for this kind of life. And if you're able to earn some money and yet live a physically fit, mentally fresh, and a spiritually evolving life, you should be doing that. So, Abhay, not any question. I don't know what to ask them because there's so much to
Mm,
learn from them
yeah.
just
I
by
guess more
observing
the
their lives.
observation
Yeah,
of
yeah.
who they are. Yeah. Do you think that would you seek out any particular bits of advice from them about how they went through maybe some of the common things that you happen to be going through as well?
I would love to see. They were guys who were not. I told you they didn't read a single piece of literature in their lives. They
Yeah.
didn't read anything in their lives. They were they were pure. They were people who were put in the world and they experienced inputs and they acted on those inputs and they made their life. I want to ask them what motivated them,
Mm,
what is the end objective of living the life they're living day to day. You're working, but what are you working towards? And uh, just questions on life because I feel uh, they were not influenced by any philosophy, by anything. So they must be having some very original inputs about life, and that would be very interesting to hear.
yeah. Well, I know that so many people are developing keen interest in you and your company and your product, and getting to learn more and more about Two Brothers Organic Farms, and for that matter, the entire ecosystem of products and conscious farming that's being led by you and your brother. Satyajit, thank you so much for joining. This was really a terrific conversation, and we wish you nothing but the best of luck.
Thank you, Abe, for inviting me and wish you and Aparna all the best for what you'll do. Thank you so much.
You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Stay tuned.